For 3 years, I thought I had the perfect wife until I came home early and found divorce papers on my table. She had calculated exactly how much of my millions she could steal, but I had already moved everything to my mother's name, and she walked away with absolutely nothing. My name is Marcus, and I'm about to tell you how the woman I thought I loved tried to destroy me for money, and how I turned the tables on her in the most satisfying way possible. It all started 5 years ago when I was 35, living in Austin, Texas, running my own successful software company. I had worked my ass off for 15 years, building my business from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I owned 3 properties, had substantial investments, and was finally at a point where I could enjoy the fruits of my labor. That's when I met Cassandra at a charity gala. She was stunning. Long auburn hair, emerald eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. More importantly, she seemed genuine. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, driving a beat-up Honda Civic, and living in a tiny apartment on the east side of town. When I asked her out, she actually seemed nervous about going to an expensive restaurant. "I'm not really used to places like this," she said softly, during our first dinner at one of Austin's finest steakhouses. Looking uncomfortable as she glanced around at the crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, I found her humility refreshing. After years of dating women who were more interested in my bank account than my personality, Cassandra seemed different. She insisted on splitting the bill, refused expensive gifts, and genuinely seemed to enjoy simple pleasures. Like hiking or cooking dinner together at my house, we dated for 8 months before I proposed. During that time, she gradually opened up about her difficult childhood. Her father had abandoned the family when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 kids on a waitress salary. They'd lost their house to foreclosure, moved from apartment to apartment, and Cassandra had worked multiple jobs through high school and community college just to help her family survive. "I never want to be that vulnerable again," she told me one night as we lay in bed, her head on my chest. "Growing up poor teaches you that money isn't everything, but it's the thing that keeps you safe." I was moved by her story and impressed by her resilience. Here was a woman who had overcome real adversity, who understood the value of hard work, who appreciated what she had because she knew what it was like to have nothing. When I proposed, she cried and said she'd never imagined she could be so lucky. Our wedding was beautiful but modest by my standards. Cassandra insisted she didn't want anything extravagant, saying she'd rather we save the money for our future together. I respected her practical nature, though I secretly would have loved to give her the fairy tale wedding she deserved. The first year of marriage was everything I'd hoped for. Cassandra was the perfect wife, supportive of my business, grateful for our comfortable lifestyle, and seemingly committed to building a life together. She quit her receptionist job and took over managing our household, which she did with remarkable efficiency. She was also incredibly smart about money, always looking for ways to save and invest wisely. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she'd say when I'd tease her about clipping coupons despite our wealth. "I never want us to take our security for granted." But looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. Cassandra asked a lot of questions about my business and finances, always framed as concern for our shared future. She wanted to understand our investments, our insurance policies, our estate planning. At the time, I thought it showed she was mature and responsible. I was an idiot. She also started subtly encouraging me to distance myself from my family and longtime friends. Nothing dramatic, just little comments about how my mother was too involved in our lives, or how my college buddies were bad influences who might hurt my business reputation. Gradually, I found myself seeing them less and less. The real red flags started about 2 years into our marriage. Cassandra began pushing for changes to our financial arrangements. She wanted to be added to all my business accounts in case something happened to me. She thought we should buy a bigger house in both our names. She suggested that I needed better life insurance. "I just want to make sure I could take care of things if you were in an accident," she'd say. "I love you too much to be helpless if something happened." I was touched by her concern, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was my business instincts, or maybe some part of me recognized the pattern. But I kept finding excuses to delay these changes. I told her we'd handle it all eventually, but I wasn't in any hurry. That's when Cassandra's behavior started to shift. She became moody and distant, complaining that I didn't trust her, that a real husband would want to protect his wife's future. She started spending more time away from home, claiming she was taking classes or volunteering, but never with any details about where or with whom. The truth hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I came home early from a business trip, planning to surprise Cassandra with dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant. Instead, I found her in our living room with a man I'd never seen before, papers spread across our coffee table. "Marcus," she gasped, jumping up from the couch. "You're home early." The man, who was clearly a lawyer based on the legal documents scattered around him, stood up awkwardly and began gathering his papers. I caught a glimpse of the letterhead: Peterson and Associates, divorce attorneys. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, despite the fact that my world was crashing down around me. Cassandra looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Marcus, I can explain, actually, don't," I said, walking closer to examine the documents before the lawyer could stuff them all into his briefcase. "I think I'm getting the picture." What I saw made my blood run cold. These weren't just divorce papers. They were detailed financial projections showing exactly how much Cassandra stood to gain in a divorce settlement. Business appraisals, asset inventories. She had been planning this for months, maybe years. The lawyer, a sleazy-looking guy in an expensive suit, tried to salvage the situation. "Mr. Thompson, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Mrs. Thompson simply wanted to understand her rights. Her rights to half of everything I'd built before I even met her," I said, reading over one of the documents. How thoughtful of her to be so prepared. Cassandra finally found her voice. "Marcus, our marriage isn't working. I've been trying to tell you, but you never listen. I just wanted to know where I stood financially by planning to divorce me. Behind my back and calculating exactly how much money you could walk away with." I was amazed at how calm I sounded. Inside, I was devastated, but somehow my business instincts had kicked in. "How long have you been working on this?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The lawyer excused himself quickly, promising to be in touch. As soon as he left, Cassandra dropped any pretense of the loving wife she'd been pretending to be. "Can't blame me for protecting myself," she said, her voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "I gave up my career to take care of your house and your life. I deserve compensation for that sacrifice." "You mean you deserve compensation for the acting job you've been doing for 3 years?" I said. "How long were you planning this? From the beginning?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. That night, after Cassandra had gone to stay with a friend, I sat in my home office and really looked at our marriage for the first time. All those questions about money, all the pushes to change our financial arrangements, all the ways she'd isolated me from my support system. She'd been positioning herself for this divorce from day one, but Cassandra had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was a naive romantic who would be blindsided by her. Betrayal. What she didn't know was that I'd survived and thrived in business for 15 years by always having a backup plan. The next morning, I called my mother. "Mom," I said, "I need to tell you something, and then I need your help." My mother, Patricia, was a sharp 68-year-old retired banker who had never particularly liked Cassandra, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. When I told her what I'd discovered, her response was immediate. "That little gold digger," she said with satisfaction. I knew something was off about her. "What do you need me to do?" What I needed was to move fast. In Texas, assets acquired during marriage are community property, meaning Cassandra would be entitled to half of any increase in my wealth since our wedding. But assets I owned before marriage or assets gifted to me by family members were separate property. Over the next 2 weeks, working with my lawyer and my accountant, I executed a plan that was completely legal but absolutely devastating to Cassandra's financial ambitions. First, I liquidated every investment and asset that could be considered community property, paying myself back for the substantial separate property I'd invested in our shared assets, the house we lived in. I'd bought it with money I'd earned before our marriage, so it was my separate property, the business. Same story, I'd built it long before I met Cassandra. Then came the masterstroke. I gifted everything to my mother. Not permanently. We set up a complex but legal arrangement where she held my assets in trust, with the understanding that she'd gift them back to me after my divorce was finalized. It was perfectly legal, documented by lawyers, and left Cassandra entitled to exactly half of nothing. But I didn't stop there. I also discovered that Cassandra had been lying about more than just her intentions. The woman who'd claimed to be traumatized by her family's financial struggles, who'd insisted she never wanted to be vulnerable again, had actually been receiving money from me that she was sending to support a boyfriend she'd been seeing for over a year. Credit card records showed charges at hotels and restaurants I'd never been to, always for two people. Phone records revealed hundreds of calls to a number registered to a guy named Tyler Morrison. When I hired a private investigator, it took him less than a week to get photos of Cassandra and Tyler together. Clearly in a romantic relationship, the PI's report was devastating. Tyler was a small-time con artist with a history of targeting wealthy women. Cassandra had met him at a bar 18 months into our marriage, and they'd been planning this divorce scam together ever since. The money she was supposedly saving from our household budget, she was funneling it to Tyler, who was using it to fund his lifestyle, while they planned to split my assets after the divorce. When Cassandra filed for divorce 2 months later, she was confident and demanding. Her lawyer requested half of everything: the house, the business, the investments, even my retirement accounts. She was asking for substantial alimony, claiming she'd sacrificed her career to support my success. My client is entitled to the lifestyle she's become accustomed to, her lawyer argued during our first settlement conference. She managed Mr. Thompson's household and supported his business endeavors. She deserves to be compensated for her contributions to their shared success. That's when my lawyer dropped the first bomb. "I'm afraid Mrs. Thompson won't be entitled to quite what she's expecting," he said calmly, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "My client has documentation showing that all of his major assets were either separate property acquired before marriage or have been legally gifted to family members." I watched Cassandra's face as her lawyer explained what the documents meant. The confusion, then the dawning horror, then the pure rage was almost worth the 3 years of lies I'd endured. "This is fraud," her lawyer sputtered. "You can't just give away marital assets to avoid a settlement?" "Actually, you can," my lawyer replied smoothly, "provided the gifts are legitimate and not made in contemplation of divorce."
My client's gifts
To his mother were made months before Mrs. Thompson filed for divorce and were properly documented as part of his estate planning. But we weren't done. That's when my lawyer produced the evidence of Cassandra's affair and financial deception. "Furthermore," he continued, "we have substantial evidence that Mrs. Thompson has been engaged in adultery and has been fraudulently using marital funds to support her paramour. In Texas, adultery can affect both property division and spousal support." The photos spread across the conference table told the whole story. Cassandra and Tyler at restaurants, at hotels, at his apartment. Financial records showing the money she'd been skimming from our accounts, phone records proving their relationship had been going on for over a year. Cassandra went white, then red, then white again. "You bastard," she whispered. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting myself," I replied calmly, something I should have started doing a long time ago. Her lawyer was frantically reviewing the evidence, and I could see him calculating how much his fee was about to shrink. "We'll need time to review these allegations," he said weakly. "Take all the time you need," my lawyer said. "But I think you'll find that Mrs. Thompson's case for substantial assets or alimony has become significantly weaker." The final settlement conference 3 weeks later was beautiful to watch. Cassandra showed up looking haggard and desperate, clearly having been coached by her lawyer to appear sympathetic. She was no longer demanding half of everything now. She was just hoping for enough money to start over. "Your Honor," her lawyer argued, "Mrs. Thompson made significant non-financial contributions to the marriage. She managed the household, supported Mr. Thompson's career, and deserves consideration for her sacrifices." My lawyer's response was devastating, Your Honor. "The evidence shows that Mrs. Thompson's primary contribution to the marriage was systematic deception and theft. She used marital resources to fund an extramarital relationship while planning to defraud my client through this divorce. She's not entitled to profit from her own misconduct. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the gifts to my mother, the proof of adultery, and the financial records showing Cassandra's theft. His ruling was everything I'd hoped for. Cassandra received exactly nothing. No property, no alimony, no assets. The judge ruled that her adultery and financial misconduct barred her from any claim to marital property. She was ordered to pay her own legal fees and to reimburse me for the money she'd stolen to support Tyler. But the real satisfaction came when Cassandra realized the full scope of what she'd lost. As we walked out of the courthouse, she grabbed my arm. "Marcus, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made mistakes, but I loved you. I really did. Can't we work something out? I don't have anywhere to go. Should have thought of that before you started planning to rob me," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "I hope Tyler was worth it." Her face crumpled. "Tyler left," she whispered. "As soon as he realized there wasn't going to be any money, he disappeared. I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That's what happens when you build relationships based on greed, Cassandra. People leave when the money runs out. The final twist came 6 months later, when my mother legally gifted all my assets back to me, exactly as we'd planned. I was restored to my full financial position, minus only the legal fees and private investigator costs. Cassandra, meanwhile, had been evicted from her apartment and was back to living with her mother, working at another dental office, but karma wasn't done with her yet. It turned out that Tyler had been running the same con on 2 other women at the same time he was working with Cassandra. When they all discovered each other, they pressed charges. Tyler was arrested for fraud and identity theft, and during his trial, all of Cassandra's involvement in his schemes came to light. She was arrested as an accessory and sentenced to 2 years of probation and community service. The local news covered the story, describing her as part of a romance fraud ring that targeted wealthy men. Her reputation in Austin was completely destroyed. Today, 3 years later, I'm happily remarried to a wonderful woman named Jennifer, who I met through mutual friends long after my divorce was finalized. Jennifer is a successful veterinarian with her own money and her own life. She doesn't need anything from me except love and partnership, which makes our relationship genuine in a way my marriage to Cassandra never was. We live in a beautiful new house purchased after the divorce, so it's entirely separate property. And we're expecting our first child next month. Jennifer knows the whole story about Cassandra, and she's amazed that anyone could be so calculating and deceptive. "I can't imagine pretending to love someone just for money," she said recently as we painted the nursery. "How do you live with yourself, knowing you're building your entire life on a lie?" I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't need to. Cassandra's lies caught up with her in the end, and justice was served in the most poetic way possible. She tried to play the long game to steal my fortune. She didn't realize she was playing against someone who was better at strategy than she was. The woman who thought she was so clever, who planned for years to take half of everything I'd worked for, walked away with nothing but a criminal record and a reputation as a gold-digging con artist. Meanwhile, I'm richer, happier, and more secure than I've ever been. Sometimes I drive past the dental office where she works now, and I see her beat-up Honda in the parking lot, the same car she was driving when I met her, the same car that made me think she was humble and genuine. It's a reminder that some people never really change. They just get better at hiding who they really are. But in the end, the truth always comes out. And when it does, justice is sweeter than any revenge you could ever plan.